We had absolutely no idea what people were going to do with these things when we started out. Matter of fact, the two people it was designed for was Woz and myself, because we couldn't afford to buy a computer kit on the market. So we liberated some parts from Hewlett-Packard and Atari, and worked on a design for about 6 months and decided that we would build our own computer. So we built one, and Woz was up till 4 in the morning for many moons, and we got it working. We showed some of our friends. Immediately, everybody wanted one. And it turned out that it took about 40 hours to build one of these things and about another 20, 30, 40 to debug it. And we had a lot of friends that worked at similar companies who could liberate the parts also. And we found ourselves spending every spare moment of our time helping our friends to build computers. And it was just getting to be a tremendous drain on our lives. So we got the idea one day that we could make a printed circuit board without the parts in it and sell these blank printed circuit boards to our friends and probably cut the assembly and debug time down to, 5, 10 hours. So Woz sold his HP 6 calculator and I sold my van, and we got $1,300 together, and we paid our friend of ours who was this PC board layout person $1,300 to do us a layout, and decided we'd sell printed circuit boards at twice what it cost to build them and hopefully recoup our calculator and transportation at some later date. So that's what we did, and I was out trying to peddle PC boards one day and walked into a bite shop, the first bite shop in Mountain View. And Paul Terrell, the then owner of the bite shop, said he would like to take 50 of these computers. And I saw dollar signs in front of my eyes. But he had one catch, which was that he wanted them fully assembled and tested, ready to go, which is a new twist. So we spent the next 5 days on the phone to distributors and convinced the electronics parts distributors around here to give us about $10,000 worth of parts on thin air, just on enthusiasm. So we got the parts and we built 100 computers and we sold 50 of them for cash, and 29 days paid off the distributors. And that's how we got started. So we had 50 computers left over. Well, that meant we had to sell them. So then we started worrying about marketing, worrying about distribution, got on the phone to the other computer stores around the country. And gradually the whole thing began to build momentum. And at that point in time, we had some feeling that we were onto something. But the feeling is so different than the experience of actually seeing it happen right now. It's entirely different. And sometimes a lot of people ask, well, did you know it was going to mushroom into this phenomenon? And you could say, yeah, we planned it out. We had lead on a piece of paper. But it's different than the experience of seeing 500 people working at Apple Computer. It's very different than the experience of seeing a 5-year-old kid who really understands the tool that he's got in front of him. And the best analogy I've ever heard is Scientific American, I think it was, did a study in the early 70s on the efficiency of locomotion. And what they did was for all different species of things on the planet, birds and cats and dogs and fish and man and goats and stuff, they measured how much energy does it take for a goat to get from here to there, right? Kilocalories per kilometer or something, I don't know what they measured it in. And they ranked them, they published a list, and the condor won. The condor took the least amount of energy to get from here to there. And man didn't do so well, came in with a rather unimpressive showing about 1/3 of the way down the list. But fortunately, someone at Scientific American was insightful enough to test man with a bicycle. And man with a bicycle won, twice as good as the condor, all the way off the list. And what it showed was that man as a tool maker has the ability to make a tool to amplify an inherent ability that he has. And that's exactly what we're doing here. It's exactly what we're doing here. We're not making bicycles to be ridden between Palo Alto and San Francisco. Okay, we're making bicycles. And yes, certain bicycles have certain generic attributes, like in general 10 speeds are better to ride in mountains than 1 speeds and other things like that. But in general, what we're doing is we're building tools that amplify a human ability. Just like you could say that the Industrial Revolution was basically an amplification of a human ability, sweat, right? We amplified sweat, fractional horsepower motors, etc., etc. What we're working towards now is the ability to amplify another human ability. And we're just starting to get glimmerings of where it's going to go. As an example, how many of you use VisiCalc? Quite a few of you. at Apple, every secretary now has an Apple on his or her desk. And they're doing all the word processing on them. You got to give them credit for that, given the software that's out. And they're doing a tremendous amount of financial modeling on the thing. As an example, I have to keep a budget for about 40, 50 people. And by the 10th of every month, my secretary's got all the information from accounting, put it into the VisiCalc model, and given me the actuals versus forecast and all the variances and et cetera, et cetera. And we're asking what-if questions on a daily basis. I can say, her name's Pat, I can say, Pat, what happens if I hire 5 more people this month? You know, what's that going to do to the budget? An hour later, I know. It's incredible. And what's even more incredible is when you go talk to these 5th graders, because they're growing up with this thing. You know, it's new for myself. I didn't know anything about this stuff 15 years ago, 10 years ago. But these kids are growing up with it. I've seen some of the kids of people that work at Apple, I've seen go from being 1, 2 years old, where they push the return key. You know, they sit on their father's lap and mother's lap, and what their part is to push the return key, to actually know how to program in the last 4 years. It's remarkable. So, one of the things that Apple is going to try to do over the next 3 or 4 years is to further that goal. And the key area we're focusing on is the following. Right now, if you buy a computer system and you want to solve one of your problems, we immediately throw a big problem right in the middle of you and your problem, which is learning how to use the computer. Right? Substantial problem to overcome. Once you overcome that, it's a phenomenal tool. But there is a barrier of having to overcome that problem. What we're trying to do, and I think there's a reasonable chance that Apple's going to make a real contribution to solving this problem in the next 36 months, is to remove that barrier so that someone can buy a computer system that knows nothing about it and directly attack their problem without learning how to program the computer. And the reason I think that Apple's got a chance of solving that problem versus a lot of other computer companies that we all know of that are much, much larger than we are now, although we're catching up, is that our whole company, our whole philosophical base is founded on one principle. And that one principle is that there's something very special and very historically different that takes place when you have one computer and one person. Very different than if you have 10 people in one computer. And let's look at some of the things that our industry has, or our segment of the computer industry has contributed to the computer industry because of that underlying philosophical concept. In general, we were in retail distribution channels 3-4 years before the rest of the computer industry is now waking up to that fact. Why? Because to serve that one-on-one relationship, it was necessary to distribute the products that way. It was necessary to have products priced so that a person one-on-one could afford the computer system, and therefore it was necessary to distribute them through a relatively lower cost distribution channel rather than a direct sales force. Interactive software, interactive video, a computer system that can be sold for a few $1,000s that can actually do some animation, that actually has the video that's so tightly coupled to the rest of the computer that you can do real-time. We've got a DEC 1170 at Apple where the terminals communicate with the 1170 at 9,600 bits per second. That can't do anything like VisiCalc can. Okay? This is a $300,000 computer system. And yet my secretary keeps the budgets on an Apple. It's far superior. So, and again, that comes from that one-on-one interaction. And that perspective is what gives us the feeling that we have an opportunity to really contribute to solving that problem. And that's where Apple's going. Now, we're very fortunate because the timing seems to be falling into place. In other words, as we move into the 80s, the amount of computational power, the amount of raw horsepower we can get into a small box for a reasonable price is staggering. Even in the last 3 years, since 4 years since we started, it's increased a few orders of magnitude. And one of the things that people always ask me is, what we've got right now is just fine. VisiCalc runs fast enough. You know, some of the database stuff runs fast enough. What are we going to do with this extra awesome power? And the answer to that is that we're going to put it into applying, into solving that problem again. In other words, we're going to start chewing up power specifically to help that one-on-one interaction go smoother. And specifically not to actually do the number crunching and the database management and the word processing or whatever. We're actually going to start applying a lot of that power specifically to help us remove that barrier. And so, assuming that we don't get into World War III, and assuming that we're able to continue to recruit outstanding people, it looks like the timing's just right for that to occur. So hopefully, when we have our International Apple Corps meeting, you know, the third, fourth one from now, we'll all be able to talk about how we've solved that problem, because I really think it's going to happen. And I really think it's going to come out of an industry that 4 years ago didn't exist, that 3 years ago everyone said was a flash in the frying pan, you know, and that I think right now a lot of people are starting to wake up. So thank you very much.